Is it still
No, I
going?
think
Is
it's
it
gonna have
flashing?
freezing
Yeah.
rain. But a little north,
Is that
they're gonna have
the
snow
first one
too.
or the-
And it looks like Charlotte's not gonna get any,
Well,
right?
that's pretty good.
Looks like
It's only
Raleigh's not.
32%.
That's why I'm leaving
Yeah.
right after the seminar
So
to
next
find
year,
out
small,
Raleigh. We
should be
really,
smaller files.
Yeah.
Because I
we're
did
gonna
half.
flight until 6:30 in the
I did
morning.
about an hour.
A
versus
direct
two
flight
hours.
from Raleigh to Orlando. So we were gonna spend the night here and then get early and drive to Raleigh and fly out. But we're driving after the seminar and I get packed up and go because just in case the roads get icy tomorrow for any reason. All right, let's get back into this choice of business entity. These are headlines, real headlines from newspapers. Bridges help people cross rivers. I never knew that. City unsure why the sewer smells. I think I know, and I'm not even a specialist. Somebody sent me this. A little corny, but kind of cute. Why did the cows return to the marijuana field? It was the pot calling the cattle back. The cattle back. Yeah. That was an extreme yawn of boredom, wasn't it? And I appreciate that. It kind of tells me where I am. I know exactly how you feel. All right, let's get back to this choice of business entity point. Let me tell you what we've done, and I'll go through these examples pretty quickly. The way our materials are set up to do this analysis, and folks, it's the way we look at it. There's many different ways, I'm sure there are. But we looking at tax rates. We go through a couple of the fairly comprehensive examples looking at effective tax rates. C versus S, with certain assumptions, the differential between the top effective tax rate, C versus S, before on a fact pattern, before the Tax Act and after the Tax Act. And our thinking there is, we're assuming the S effective rate is going to be lower, again, based on our assumptions, than the C because we're assuming distributions of double tax. And we say, okay, if the differential of the S beat the C by 8 percentage points, the net effective tax rate on the business income before the Tax Act, and then we look at that same comparison afterwards, and maybe they're both lower because the tax rate's lower, but the differential's still roughly 9%, then where's your tax savings based on our assumptions? And we'll go through a couple of those. We'll talk a little bit about the impact of the accumulated earnings tax of 20% of the personal holding company tax. That's the ticking time bomb. Because, of course, to really get any maximum benefit out of the 21% rate of a C, you got to defer the double tax as long as you can. That means retaining the earnings inside the C for as long as you can and avoid that. The impact of the 100% gains exclusion on 1202 stock, that seems to be the one that is the best candidate. This qualified small business stock, there's a lot more interest in that. And then we have some listings of factors that would suggest pass-through would be better, and then some factors that would suggest perhaps a C would be better. And then for all our computations, we have computational exhibits to show how we came up to those numbers. So let's go to page 117, and let's go through. We're just going to go through three quick examples of effective tax rates based on these assumptions. Situation 1 on page 117, bottom of the page, it carries over the top of the next page. We're comparing the top effective, and we're including state and federal rates, both at the corporate level and if there is a corporate tax, it's C we're looking at, and on the individual level, we're just assuming the tax rates. We're assuming the highest rate taxpayer. We're assuming top rate, and these are the assumptions. We're assuming on these comparisons before and after, we're looking at S and a C before and after the Tax Act. We're assuming the income is taxed at the highest federal tax rate, whether it's in the C or if it's taxed at the individual on pass-through on their rates. But we're assuming no AMT is involved, either at the corporate level, there wouldn't be any more corporate because it's gone. After 2017, we're assuming no AMT impact on the individual. We're assuming all taxable income is distributed annually. Now that's a big assumption, because if you're assuming it's distributed annually, you're dealing with a business where owners need the money. They want the money. They're not going to want to leave it in there 5, 6, 7 years. To accumulate and get those lower rates. So we're assuming they're going to get the money out. Of course, what that kicks in with a C corporation, that means the double tax is going to hit every year because those will be dividends. We're assuming the income is all income is taxed on a flat state individual rate, state individual tax rate of 55.5% and a flat corporate rate of 3%. We're factoring those state tax rates in there. After the TCJA changes, we're assuming the owner gets no federal tax benefit of the 5.5% state individual income tax. So we're factoring in that after TCJA, the C corporations get the benefit of the full state and local tax deduction. We're assuming the worst case scenario, the individual gets no benefit if they're paying it, because we're assuming they got property tax of at least $10,000. we're assuming the owner materially participates in the business, at least on this assumption. Why is that important? Because if we're dealing with an S corporation pass-through, and if we're not materially participating, that income's coming through as passive income, which means we're assuming highest tax bracket. What do we assume there? We have to add 3.8% on it, don't we? Net investment income tax on passive. But we're assuming they're materially participating, so they wouldn't have that. We're assuming the dividend distributions, and we're assuming every year we're distributing is going to be taxed at the additional tax of 3.8% on the dividend, which they are, qualified dividends. We're assuming a high income tax bracket. And at least initially, we're assuming all the business income, if it was on a pass-through, will qualify for the 20% deduction after TCJA. So those are the assumptions. And if you look on page 119, page 119, bottom of page 117, I'm sorry. Bottom of page 117, top of page 118, just look up on the screen where you have it summarized. On all of those assumptions, remember again, we're assuming all the business income on a pass-through would get the 199A deduction. Before TCJA, before we had 199A, before we had a limit on the state and local taxes, etc., the top effective rate for a pass-through would be 44.11%. Remember, 39.6. That's included and the tax effective. The top effective rate on C corporation income that is taxed at the C and then distributed as a dividend is 53.92. Now you say, where did they get those numbers? Well, we tell you, we've got our exhibits in the back of this chapter. Go to the page and look at it. Don did it. He's always right. And I say that not with much tongue in cheek. This, again, I said yesterday, this shines in a lot of areas, but he loves these computations. And he loves to do these. So and of course I checked them. I told him I checked them.
You mean what?
I didn't realize. They look good to me, Don. It's kind of like when your software does the AMT computation. It looks good to me. That's exactly what I thought. But anyway, they're right, and and you can see where we got them. Nonetheless, all the these factors, the pass-through income before the Tax Act would be the top rate 44.11. For the C corporation, distributing income, the top effective rates, corporate and shareholder, 53.92. And those assumptions, the pass-through basis just on tax rates, forget everything else, just on tax rates, effective tax rates, on the highest income, 9.81%. So it's almost 10 percentage point differential. Okay, then we factor those same assumptions into the new rates post TCJA. And so we go, what's the effective rate, top effective rate on those assumptions? The S corporation shareholder, 35.1. Now, you say, well, wait a minute, how do we get so much lower? The top rate only went from 39 to 37. Yeah, but we get a 20% deduction on that, right, after TC. So we get a top effective rate, state and federal, 35.1. The top effective rate for C corporation on distributed income is 45.82. How do you get that? It's 21 at the corporate level. Yeah, we're distributing it. Comes out as a dividend. That's 20%, plus dividends have a 3.8%. You factor all that in, the state, etc. It is a lot lower than it was. It was 53.92 before the Tax Act on distributed C at the highest rate. It's now 45.82. But see, with the pass-through, it went down as well as it should. 44.11 at the individual level, it went down to 35.1. But when you compare the two differences, it's a little bit easier. So using those assumptions, the tax rate, now if you factor in all the tax rules changes, the pass-through S actually beats it even a little bit more than it did before. I mean, again, you can make examples, and these projections are only as good as the assumptions. I understand that. But the point, you know what my assumptions are, but the point is, if you're looking purely at tax rate, if the reason you're in an S before is because one of the main reasons you had a 9.81% percentage point benefit, and you apply the same facts and assumptions after the Tax Act, and you got a 2.72% benefit for the S, why would you change? There's no burning. Okay, let's change the facts ever so slightly. Let's go to situation 2 on page 118, bottom half of the page. We're going to look at 3 quick situations. Here, we're the same assumption that was had in one, highest brackets, state rate, 3%, 5%, individual, corporate. We're assuming all income is being distributed. The only difference on this one is we're assuming the income does not qualify for the 20%.
Yeah, a lot of our clients.
And how could that be? Well, that could be a situation where you have high income taxpayer and they're well over 415 and they don't have any W-2 wages or no they're limited by that. That could be it. It could be SSTB income. That's in your over 315, 415, you don't qualify. So there's business income that wouldn't qualify. Not a lot. But there's some, let's assume the worst case scenario doesn't qualify. Before the act, we had the same differential. These are the same numbers and assumptions because we didn't have the 20% before the Tax Act. So our differential, the S is 44.11, the C-Corp distributed income 53.92, the S wins by 9.81. But now you look at after, with that pass-through not qualifying for the 20% deduction, now our effective rate after the act is 42.5. The top effective rate for the C corporation is 45.82. The S still wins, but not by much, by 3.32. But once again, if your primary reason before and after, before the Tax Act on these assumptions, even without the 20% deduction, if your primary reason was because you got a better rate, overall effective rate on your income, if that's your primary reason to be the S or the pass-through, you still have not as strong a reason, but you still win on these assumptions, again, based on your parameters. So looking at that example, you don't see a burning need to go to C. In fact, you don't really see a need at all to go to C and say tax rates, again, based on those assumptions. And then finally, example 4, and this is the worst case scenario for a pass-through. The owner who doesn't qualify for the 20% and is not materially participating. Now, why is that the worst case scenario? Because one, since they don't materially participate on a pass-through, the pass-through income is going to be subject to 3.8% net investment income because it's passed. And we're not getting the 20%. So this would be the worst case scenario. Everything else is the same. Before the Tax Act, the top effective rate for the individual pass-through owner is 47.7, including factoring in the state taxes. And for the corporate is 53.92, but still the pass-through wins by 6.22 percentage points after the changes of the same other parameters. The top effective weight for the individual is 46.3. Still a little bit, but see, we're adding a lot more to it because it doesn't get the 20%, and it adds a 3.8, and then of course we have 37% to start with, plus the state taxes. But the top effective rate for the C corporation, now we're factoring in 21% at the corporate level, is only 45.82. Actually, the C beats it, not by much, less than half a percentage point, not enough to really make the analysis change dramatically at all, based on those assumptions. So in a worst case scenario, at least on the comparisons we look at, with the assumptions we're looking at, and the big one there is, we're assuming all the income is distributed annually. Why is that big? Because if we're doing that, and a lot of businesses do or want to do that, that triggers the double tax on an annual basis for a C corporation. With an S corporation, it doesn't matter. Distributions aren't taxes. So, but even with that, there's not if the reason was we were an S before because we saved the 6.22% on these assumptions, percentage rate, well, that reason pretty much goes away, but they're basically the same, but we still have other reasons to be an S, or a partnership for that matter, particularly a partnership, because we don't have to worry about double tax. We don't have to worry about when they sell the assets. We have the 754 election. I mean, there are a lot of those other benefits we talked about from a pass-through. So this doesn't, even a worst-case scenario on these assumptions, worst case for the pass-through, given the 3.8 and the no 20% deduction, there doesn't seem to be, on these facts, a burning reason to go to C. Now, you can change the facts, particularly if you can hold that money inside the C corporation for an extended period of time. But when you do, and get that deferral of second tax, and you may defer if you wait until the distributor, wait until the shareholder dies, which is one of the greatest tax planning devices we have. Get a step-up basis in the C corporate stock, and you'll never pay the second tax. Right? That's a pretty narrow set of facts. But the point is, I'm not saying this proves you shouldn't or not. I'm just saying on those assumptions, if you compare those rates and on those basic three alternative situations, there doesn't seem to be a burning need to go to a C to save an income tax rates. Now, let me make one more point. I am not seeing a big shift to C. Whether it's justified or not, I'm not seeing a lot of businesses intentionally convert from partnership or S corporation to C for the tax rates. Has anybody in here either had a client that's done it or your own business? Seen one, and the dynamic was his client is a partner in a big law firm, which is an SSTB. The law firm, just without your consultation, went to a PSC, is what they did, right? They didn't talk to you. Yeah. Oh, that's stunning. Your client, particularly a client who's in a law firm. Now, I'm a lawyer too, so I can make fun of it. A law firm made a decision without talking to their CPA? That never happens. I'm kidding about that. Yeah. So the point is, yeah, they did. I guess they did some projections, I presume, and they, you know, and of course, the law firm, if it's going to be taxed automatically at 21%. Now they can have accumulated earnings tax problem too if they don't distribute that income out, as you will. They distribute if they take it out as W-2 wages, what we normally do with the PSE. You're not getting any benefit on that out of the 21% because everything's being taxed to the shareholders' wages. But yeah, I'd love to see what their projections were, and there could be. There could be a possibility. I just don't know what it is. Yeah. Yeah. He says the reasonable compensation issue technically should be the same for a C corporation versus an S. What's reasonable is reasonable. Forget the tax. What's reasonable?
Oh, look how easy that is.
Oh, Paige. Oh,
Mm.
Paige did that, huh?
We got it now.
You're leaving it in there, of course. It's tax at 21%, no pipe tax. It's accumulating. If it accumulates too much, then we have to start at some point worry about the accumulated earnings tax. If that hits, the C's not going to work for tax rate purposes, right? That's a triple tax. And if we take it as a distribution, well, at least it's, you know, from a C, it's going to be taxed as a dividend, a qualified dividend, and it's going to hit 20% if the highest tax rate, 23.8. Again, I'm not trying to give you, this is the answer. It's not. It just gives you one way of looking at a set of effective tax rates, and at least, and I don't think those assumptions are way out of whack. And we think in terms of, okay, we're going to take advantage of the 21%. We want to have a lot of income taking the benefit of it. We're talking about, you know, get really tax savings. Well, we're talking about high income taxpayers. And so that's why we're using the highest tax rates. Yes, sir. Page, oh my God, I'm looking into the materials. This could be dangerous. He's asking a question. 116. Hold on, I'm getting to it. 116, and what are we looking at? Second paragraph on page 116, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Number 2, the ability of C Corp to deduct state and local income tax. All we're doing there is we're listing the 3 dynamics that have changed after TCJA that impact C versus S. The first one is the rate reduction, as I've said, for the C is of 21%. The third one is the 20% that we didn't get before. That second one is because if we're dealing with a pass-through and we're doing state and local taxes, which we're dealing with the individual, they can't deduct as an itemized deduction more than $10,000. But a C corporation can, on the C return, right? C return doesn't have, they can deduct all of their state and local taxes, right, for income tax purposes. So that's a benefit to C has. I mean, some people find, you know, they just initial thought, well, if I'm limited to 10 as an itemized deduction for my pass-through business income, because I'm paying on the 1040, if I'm a C, I can deduct all state and local taxes. No, well, yeah, we're talking about state and local income tax. But still, even with property tax, you're limited to 10. But a business, you know, a C corporation can deduct all state and local taxes. There would be no cap on that. That's just the factor we're putting in. What's that? Oh yeah, the S corp. He's correct. He said if an S corporation or partnership, if it's business property, yes, the property tax could be deducted as a income tax, itemized deduction. No, excuse me, as a business deduction. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and again, we're factoring that in the best we can, but we're giving the benefit of a bigger state and local tax deduction to the C corporation. That's the point we're making. To make the best case for a C, but even doing that, we don't, if factoring all that in, we don't see a significant rate of benefit. In many cases, the benefit still stays with the pastor. Now, that was on page 121, and I mentioned this, I'll just mention it briefly. The accumulated earnings tax, page 121, item 5 near the top. As we look at these rates, and this 21% rate that's really driving a lot of this discussion for a C corporation, I think it's worth noting that let's look at an individual whose total income, or its taxable income, is generated entirely or almost entirely by business income that qualifies for the 199A. So we're dealing with an individual who's got a business and their taxable income is generated by qualified business income, and let's assume their qualified taxable income and the qualified business income are comparable. So every dollar they have of taxable income, let's assume, is qualified business income, and let's assume that all qualifies for 20%. In that scenario, before we even think about going to a C to take advantage of that 21% rate, wouldn't we want to see how much income, business income, which is also taxable income on a joint return, under the current individual tax rates, progressive structures, how much income you'd have to have on a joint return, if it's all business income, let's assume that, with the 20% deduction, before your overall effective rate would be above 21%. And if you look on page 121, item 5, for example, if on a joint return, if you could have taxable income before the 199A deduction, but assuming it does qualify, you'd have, if you had taxable income of $500,000, and then you factor, and that's all QBI, and you factor in the 20% deduction, you're on the individual return, that effective tax rate on that $500,000 is only 18.3%. Or another way to look at it, how much taxable income, assuming it's all qualified business income on a joint return, would you have to have under the current income tax rates for individuals before your effective rate is above 21%? And that number is $694,000. You'd have to have taxable income, assuming it's all QBI, and assuming that 694 is before the 20% deduction. You'd have to have almost $695,000 on a joint return, and your individual effective rate on that 694 is 21%. So anything below that, again, assuming it all qualifies, is going to be the effective rate is going to be below 21%. Why would you go into a flat rate of 21% subject to double tax when you're already in a pass-through posture, assuming that, and your effective rate is already below 21%? That number just surprised me. That number is pretty high. And how do I get that? 694 less 20% is 555 on a joint return. You look at the tax rate tables. You get 145,863 as the tax. You take that as a percentage of the taxable income before the deduction to get a percentage. It's 21%. And if you did that same computation on a single return instead of joint, you'd have to have taxable income of over $350,000 before your effective rate would be at or above 21%. Assuming again all of it qualifies for the 20% deduction. So this tax savings, obviously, when we're dealing with a C based on the 21% rate, is if it's there, it's going to be for a much higher income taxpayer. Page 121, item C is dealing with the accumulated earnings tax, and we talk about that generally. We've already mentioned it, but if that comes into play, and you're deferring the distribution from your C corporation, so you're deferring the double tax, and you run into the accumulated earnings tax. Now that hasn't been hit real commonly over the years. But the IRS has made indications suggest that they may hit it more in light of this 21% rate. But nonetheless, it's a ticking time bomb, and that would destroy your benefit of your C corporate rate. Page 122, item D. Impact of the 100% gain for Section 1202 stock. Section 1202 stock has been with this provision since 1993, and it still hasn't. And it's getting a lot of action. It's getting a lot of attention for startups, particularly startups and high-tech startups and whatever that really think they're going to explode in value. And to be a 1202 stock, at a minimum, you have to be a C corporation. And so what we did, and I won't go through much of the discussion, but we did an example of that using similar computations. This is all post-tax law, tax act change. This is 2018 or after, but we went through these assumptions. In 2018, you have a startup business. Let's assume it qualifies to issue 1202 stock. And remember, 1202 stock, if you hold it over 5 years, and if it was issued after September, if that stock was issued, and it was issued after a date, I put it in my notes so I remember it, September 27th, 2010, if it was issued after September 27th, 2010 and held over 5 years, and then you sell it, how much gain is, what percentage of the gain is excluded? 100%. Up to how much? Up to $10 million. And that would be true if you sold the assets of the qualified small business stock company and then liquidated the corporation. At least the tax on the liquidation of the corporation to the shareholder would also be zero, 100% excluded, up to $10 million, holding it over 5 years. So on our assumptions, you'll see our projections. 1202 stock, it was set up in 2018. The corporation made no dividend or liquidating distributions the first 5 years because it's growing, it's keeping its earnings. Let's assume it's making good earnings, but it's, reinvesting those into expansion, so there's no accumulated earnings issue. The corporation pays no compensation payments to the shareholders, and because they're investors of this 1202 stock, so they're not getting compensation, nor do they get distribution. In the 6th year, we assume, after the 5-year holding period, the S corporation sells all of its corporate assets to the buyer. Now, the buyer could have bought stock, and the shareholder would have loved that. But the buyer's going to want to buy assets, so we assume that. That's the worst case scenario for the owner, for the S corp, that we sell the assets and then we liquidate. And when we liquidate under 331, at least the gain up to $10 million to the shareholders per shareholder is excluded. We have corporate level tax. The shareholders' flat individual state income tax rate is 5.5%. The state corporate rate is 3%. When we talk about we assume that the exclusion for federal purposes is also allowed for state purposes in computing the state tax impact. And it normally is. States that start with AGI, federal AGI, and you exclude the gain from AGI, then you exclude for state purposes unless they specifically. We assume that the shareholders do not materially participate because they're investors. Where would that come into play? When we liquidate up 5+ years down the road and they have capital gain on the liquidation, well, that would be excluded. So we're assuming that no material participation. And then we assuming no accumulated earnings tax and no personal holding company tax. And we compare that pattern, a qualified small business stock, which has to be a C, versus an S corporation. And those comparisons are on page 123, situation B. For the first 5 years of operations, then in the 6th year, the tax impact of selling the assets and liquidating. I'm not going to go through the numbers, you can see it, but you can see the qualified small business stock that gets the 100% exclusion after that 5th year, even though selling the assets and not making distributions along the way, it beats the S pretty dramatically in overall tax rates on the operating income and on the gain that's taxed when we sell the assets. And that's, and you can go through the numbers, but you'll see that it is that rate differential, which is pretty dramatic, that is pushing a lot of tax planners. If you can qualify for 1202 stock and you're assuming appreciation, etc., yeah, you can see a very good rate benefit with the C as it operates, and then particularly when you sell the stock or sell the assets and liquidate up to 5 years. Page 123, item 2, near the bottom of the page, what is qualified small business stock? We haven't seen a lot of it over the years. Most cases where I've seen it or had CPAs talk to me about it, participants, a client had it and didn't even know it. They sold stock of a C corporation that was set up after 1993. They clearly held it over 5 years. They were getting ready to report the gain for tax purposes, and they go back and they say, this is a closely held C corporation. When was it set up? After 93? Where did you get the stock? It was issued to me when it was set up. Is it a qualifying business? Yes. And all of a sudden you discover it's qualifying small business stock, and they didn't even know it. You don't have to make an election. It either is or it isn't. And then the CPA many times says, hey, this qualifies. It depends on when it was issued. It can be a 50% exclusion, a 75% exclusion, or 100% if it's issued after September 27th. So it's got to be a C. Page 124, item B. Certain businesses, page 124, item B, cannot be issued qualified small business stock. Item 1B1, personal service can't, lawyers, doctors, CPAs, etc. Financial services business, banks can't. Farming business can't be a qualified small business stock corporation. Businesses producing, extracting depletable products can't. Well, what can be? What can be would be a retailer, a manufacturing business, a drug developer, pharmaceutical developer, some kind of high-tech equipment that's being developed. Those would all qualify, assuming it meets they're a C corporation, etc. One more point, and I've had this question asked on page 126, item 3. Can I convert, and I've got an S corporation which doesn't qualify, can kind of convert from S to C, and from that point on be qualified small business stock? And the answer appears to be no, because it's got to be a C corporation for substantially all of its life as a corporation. But what if I've got an operating business that's a partnership, or let's even make it simpler, a Schedule C, just a Schedule C operating business? You say, man, maybe I'm going to incorporate this. Issue qualified small business stock, get the benefit of that 21% bracket over 5 years, and then when I sell, I'll have no gain. What we just basically looked at through that example. And if you look at page 126, item 3, the rule seems to be pretty clearly under the statute. You could incorporate an existing business, an operating business, with the assets. You incorporate it under 351 tax-free carryover basis. And that would qualify. But what qualifies for the exclusion is only if...
Checkpoint.
You're going to have to value that business before you incorporate it. So if a business has like a $100,000 basis in its assets, but has a value of $1 million, for regular tax purposes, its basis of the stock is $100,000. But for the exclusion, 1202, the basis is $1 million, and it's only post-incorporation appreciation that would get the exclusion. So you'd have to value that in that situation. All right, page 128, and I've hit most of these. This is just a listing. Important factors indicating partnership or S corporation may be preferential even after the Tax Act, and there's most of those I already talked about.
I was reading yesterday and today.
Page 129, bottom 2/3, some features or factors that may suggest a C could be preferable in light of these tax rates. Obviously, the most significant factor would be 1202 stock, qualified small business stock. Has anybody dealt with that? Is anybody dealing with a business and startup and they're looking at the 1202 stock issue? Did you say yes? You had it before, and before it was 100% exclusion, so it's even more beneficial now. So that's getting a lot of play, and particularly with startups and high-tech startups about being a C. All right, that's all I want to say about choice of business entity, and that's enough. Probably too much. Page 189. And I will close with, I don't see, I think it was illustrated here as well, at least by your hands or lack of hands, a big move to see based on that 21%. This is from a baby boomer, senior citizen. Here's a cartoon. Here's a senior citizen. He's in a chair, getting a haircut, and there's a sign in front of the chair, and it says "Express Chair, 12 hairs or less." I assume that means on top of your head. You know, when you get older, men get older. There's hair. You know. There's an old line from